Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How Alaska Airlines is Fixing Errors Caused by M&A, brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by apexanalytix. We have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. If you have any technical questions or issues using the WebEx platform, please use the chat box and I will respond right away. If you have any issues with audio, please click on the phone icon located above the chat window to receive the teleconference information. For those that do call in, to ensure call quality, everyone's lines have been muted today. If you happen to get disconnected, you can log on again using the instructions provided in your webinar confirmation email. If you continue to experience difficulty, please email webinars@iofm.com and we will respond as soon as we can. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box and hit send to submit them. At the end of the presentation, we will have our presenters answer these questions, but please do not hesitate to ask your questions during the presentation as they occur to you. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 2 business days. And with all of that out of the way, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Lori Foley, Director of Customer and Vendor Payments at Alaska Airlines, Phil Beane, Senior Vice President of Global Field Operations at apexanalytix, and Q&A at the end of the webinar today will be moderated by Mark Brousseau, President of Brousseau and Associates. And at this time, I would like to welcome our speakers and hand the webinar off to Lori.
Thank you so much. So this is just a little information about Alaska. I was surprised to learn when I came to Alaska Airlines that we've actually been in business since 1932. And we started in the state of Alaska, hence our name, and still have strong ties to that 49th state. So we are now a member of the One World Alliance, so the departures per day and destinations displayed on this slide represent all of the places you can go within that alliance. But we fly to 115 destinations ourselves on our medal. So we say, if the plane is painted with the Eskimo, that's our medal. A couple of, kind of interesting notes. Before COVID, Alaska had 16 years of profitability. So back to the year 2003, and in 2019, pre-COVID, we were one of only 3 airlines with investment grade credit ratings. So we're very proud of that.
Thank you for that, Lori. Very interesting information. I want to take just a quick minute and introduce those not familiar with apexanalytix. We are a solutions provider. We work for the world's largest and most complex organizations. Within our products, we have 4 solutions, and I'll start from left to right. The first is our recovery audit services. We are the world's largest recovery audit firm in the commercial space. The second is our first strike technology, and so this is technology that companies use more proactively to prevent overpayments on a daily basis. The next is our industry-leading Apex portal, which is essentially a seamless vendor onboarding and validation solution. And our last solution is our Smart VM database, and this is the largest supplier database in the world. We actually leverage this content for the first 3 solutions, our recovery audit, first strike, and Apex portal. So a little bit about Apex for those not familiar, and Lori, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Phil. So I actually started my career many years ago in the airline industry back at American, but in 2015, I moved out to the Bay Area and went to work for Virgin America. And I hadn't been there very long when talks of acquisition started. So as you might or might not know, Alaska Airlines did acquire Virgin America talks started in 2016, so just a little over a year after I had started. And you know, it's always a little nerve-wracking when these things happen, but they happen all the time, and we've seen it many, many times throughout the airline industry for sure. But when I came to Alaska, was offered a job down here. They offered me a job doing a couple of things I had never actually managed before, and one of them was accounts payable. So I'd done a lot of different things throughout my career and at the airlines, but I was definitely new to AP. So, you know, with an acquisition, there's a lot of work that gets created. You have to merge our systems, our vendor masters, and the actual people doing the jobs. So we were really busy for a couple of years there. Felt like we really needed to focus on what was critical to our operation. And so things like recovery audit really fell off our to-do list. And it's a project that we knew could be beneficial, but it's very easy to say, you know, we'll just do this audit next year, and then things get pushed. You know, there's always something that comes up. So at any rate, no job I've ever had said manage an AP recovery audit as part of its responsibilities. So it's always an additional thing that can be done as best practice, though. So the ironic aspect of being busy is that, you know, your team gets frantically putting in invoices, and they're not as careful. So they're definitely more likely to make mistakes. And with the merger, you know, because I'm sure this happens in a lot of industries, but we had a lot of supplier overlap. So some of our suppliers would send invoices to Alaska and Virgin, or they would send Virgin invoices to Virgin, but with Alaska Airlines. So created a lot of mix-up from the supplier stance. And at Virgin, most of the invoices did go directly to accounts payable, whereas at Alaska, sometimes those invoices are sent directly to the working groups. So that also, excuse me, presented some challenges. At any rate, at the back of my head, I just thought, you know, we'll look at this later. We're just really too busy to look at it now.
Yeah, that's a familiar story, Lori, that within the recovery ops space I often hear is busy, busy, busy. And so I think it's a great segue into a slide which talks about change. And so, you know, change takes many, many different forms. You know, I think it's fair to say it's inevitable. Certainly, from an Alaska standpoint, your merger with Virgin, that's a positive change. And implementing new things, all positive things. In my world, in the recovery audit world, change actually isn't always so positive. And what I mean by that is generally when there is change within an organization, well, I shouldn't say generally, I've been doing this for 17 years. My experience says when there's change within an organization, it's going to create a spike in overpayments. And so I've got a little chart here. First of all, this is not Alaska Airlines. This is actually another one of our clients. And what we're depicting is a time frame. This client actually went through an e-invoicing implementation, so very, very prominent e-invoicing implementation. E-invoicing, generally speaking, very positive. So as you think of change, this is a good change, right? Reducing manual processes. But what happened during this implementation was we all know suppliers want to get paid. And so because there was this change going on and the way that suppliers were submitting invoices, supplier just wants to get paid. And so that a couple data points I think you'll find very interesting. Suppliers sending invoices in the old way, they're sending them in the new way, they're picking up the phone calling, they're sending emails. We had an invoice, a single invoice for this client during this time period was paid 6 times. So one invoice paid 6 times. Another important or interesting, I would say, fact about this e-invoicing implementation is during the 4-month deployment, and this was kind of baseline before, there was a 300% increase in overpayments. Just think about that. I mean, during the time in which they're going through a very positive change, obviously a little bit turbulent, their overpayments increased by 300%. Another example, this actually, I just found this out earlier this week, and so I think it's very interesting. We have a client that uses our first strike technology, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, as a preventative solution for software. They just completed their cloud ERP. So they had I won't mention the ERP, but they had it on site, and just as a lot of companies are doing, they actually moved to the ERP's cloud solution, same provider. And during that time period, their duplicates prevented increased 1,600%. 1,600%. So, the point of all this is really, as I said earlier, change is inevitable. It's going to happen, whether it's M&A with Alaska and Virgin, or maybe you're like our other client, you're implementing e-invoicing, or maybe you're outsourcing, or you're own sourcing, or you're upgrading your ERP. Any change, it is going to create distractions in your business, and during that time, the data says you are going to have a spike in overpayments. And so, what I would recommend, best practice is, if you are going to be going through a material change within your organization, that you find a partner in the recovery audit business. Obviously, I would love for it to be Apex, but find a partner to kind of walk through that process. And I know, Lori, you all decided like you just didn't have time. And I think what folks will learn at the end of this is, maybe in hindsight, it would have been great if we could have partnered during that. But find a partner, walk through that entire change process with your recovery audit partner, such that overpayments that occur, you can address them quickly. So back to you, Lori.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. So when COVID hit, our invoice volume actually dropped over 50%. So, and we were just looking for cash. So I suggested, we had some projects that were canceled. So I said, hey, let's use these resources that we have and move forward with this recovery audit, because it could be a way to get some cash in the door and also just clean up our AP a little bit. So we hadn't done it for 3.5 years at that point. I was really concerned about how long it was going to take to extract the transactional data, how we were going to get an auditor connected to our systems. Unfortunately, the Alaska team, even before I was a part of it, had attended the annual elite event that Apex puts on. And so the year before COVID hit, I had attended the event and met some other folks in the airline industry. So Apex was the company that we chose. Partly, I did rely on my airline finance network to provide the recommendation and just all the great things that we had learned at the event.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lori. And Elite is a fantastic event to collaborate with peers, both in your industry and outside of your industry. And so just, a couple things, thinking back to what you mentioned earlier around the time frame, and then thinking about the change slide, maybe 2 points. The first is, and I alluded to this before, but I just would recommend, as I recommended earlier, always have a partner with you when you're going through some change. The second piece is, ultimately, you should work with a recovery audit partner to try to identify process gaps and fix them. I mean, that is the ultimate goal, is to identify where you have shortcomings, if you do, and then put business processes in place to fix that. And so it's just so important, and something that we recommend with all of our clients and partners is, when we are talking about the time period in which we're going to audit, I mean, we'll always go back and do a historical audit and look at, 1, 2, 3 years back. So we'll always do that. But the closer you can get to the transaction without actually stepping on the toes of like your team, Lori, the closer you are to the transaction, the higher likelihood you're going to have a chance to actually address any shortcomings that's identified. And what I mean by that is, if we're auditing 2 years behind the transaction and we identify you have, some sort of rebate issue, or you have a duplicate payment problem, I mean, we can identify your issue and provide recommendations. The problem is, there's been such a gap between when the error was made and current time frame. You don't know, have we already put a process in place to fix this? Does it still exist? And so when you can stay kind of that sweet spot is about 90 days behind the transaction, you get feedback on a more regular basis. And so, hey, this just happened 95 days ago or 120 days ago, and we're starting to see it consistently happen. You all need to look towards putting a fix in place now. And because we're continuously testing and by auditing, it doesn't take us long to say, all right, it's now been 90 days. We're not seeing that issue again. We're not seeing these rebates. We're not seeing these duplicate payments. So that's the first piece, which is just the timing around it. The second piece is, I know you all, Lori, chose to do this because some other projects got pushed aside. I'm asked all the time, like, hey, Phil, how much IT resources is it going to require to do this? We know we need to do it, but I'm sure most people on the call would agree that IT resources are very scarce. And so I'm asked, like, how much time is it going to take? And I always say the same thing. Well, just depending on your ERP, and we'll just assume it's one of the major ones. Apex, we have pre-written extracts. It's all the heavy lifting we actually provide to our client so that all they're doing is actually just running these extracts and pulling the data. We have some clients that actually don't have maybe one of the more prominent ERPs. They have maybe a legacy homegrown system. We can accommodate that too. So, I don't want to, I want to be very transparent. We do have to have some IT involvement. We have to get the data. But, experience has said, we're going to provide you all the heavy lifting such that all you need to do is just install it and run it. So back to you, Lori.
Thanks. So yeah, we really didn't think, even when we embarked on this journey, that we were going to find a lot of duplicates. And even my partner that works on the finance system side was convinced that we weren't going to find very much. But we quickly figured out that there were a lot of credits out there we just weren't aware of. Warranty credits was the biggest one, which is related to our maintenance programs. So here in AP, we had no information on the warranties or how they related to the potential credits or what the suppliers were issuing. So a big thing we learned here is that we should be working much closer with our supply chain group to identify which suppliers are providing these credits so that we can capture them closer to the transaction date. And this is one area where being busy really stopped us from doing those periodic statement audits in-house. If we would have been doing that, we would have caught those a lot sooner. So we ended up, finding quite a bit of money. Apex found quite a bit of money for us, I should say, which was a great benefit to us during this time when we were actually paying out more refunds than we were selling tickets. So it was a great help.
Yeah, and that's common, Lori. I mean, especially around rebates. Returns is another one. And, one of the things we talk about, when we're meeting with our clients on how do they address shortcomings in process of like, well, we got an abundance of warranty credits or volume credit, or warranty rebates or volume rebates. One of the things that I've had many conversations around is, look, if procurement and sourcing negotiated, we'll use volume rebate because it's really simple to understand. If sourcing negotiated that volume rebate, they assume that it will be hit. I mean, they assume that threshold will be hit and the rebate would be earned. And if the assumption is that's going to happen in the current fiscal year, like, why wouldn't you go ahead and enter the credit into the system, right? You just push the date out to the end of your fiscal year, but it gives you visibility into something that you feel fairly certain is going to occur. And same thing around returns. Like when people have returns issues, which is a lot of clients, as soon as AP finds out about that return, go ahead and enter it in the system, even before the return is processed. Just, again, it gives you visibility so that it doesn't fall off the radar. And I know, Lori, we've talked about these before.
We definitely have. Another thing during COVID is we really started trying to look at ways that we could expand our use of our current ERP or ways to automate processes that didn't cost us any money. So we do use a contract lifecycle management software, but it's not like an everyday thing for AP to go in there and look at a contract and say, oh, we should be getting a credit for this engine return, or oh, we took delivery of an E-175, so we should be getting a credit for something related to that. But anyway, so we're definitely working much closer, like I mentioned, with our supply chain, where we've begun revamping our entire P2P process. We're reviewing some automated solutions to help us streamline the process. And now that we're starting to emerge from COVID a little bit, I think it's more reasonable that some of these enhancements and improvements will happen. But I have to say that it was definitely an eye-opening experience during COVID, and to see all the different ways in which we could just make this department better.
And Lori, I'll compliment you. We've worked together for quite some time, and just your willingness to think differently and get creative on ways to eliminate manual processes, to be more efficient within your organization. So great job. I'll wrap things up from my standpoint, and it falls in line, Lori, with you talking about kind of manual processes and finding ways to automate those. I think this is probably a topic that's near and dear to most folks on the call, but when we think about manual work and areas that can be automated, one of the things we think about is bank account change requests. And so it's probably fair to say most people on the call, they have standard controls, albeit manual. When someone wants to add a bank account or change it, it's the old supplier callback, or some do the penny test. But either way, it's a very manual process. And we all know when you got humans doing manual processes, there's just a lot of room for error. And arguably more important is it also opens up opportunities for the fraudsters. And, they'll kind of slip by us and get in. So how do you address this, what I would say a very risky manual process? We believe in using technology. And so, we believe in implementing technology. And we have multiple ways we can do that, web apps, our portal, supplier management, or just through an API. But leveraging that technology to confirm ownership of a bank account automatically versus a manual process. It removes the people component out of it and just leverages technology to say, yes, this bank account actually belongs to the supplier that's either wanting to set it up or wants to make the change. So back to you, Lori.
Yeah, I can say, Phil, we use all of those manual processes, and we have been victims of those fraudsters because we don't have a more sophisticated way to test or to check on those bank accounts. But to wrap it up for me, I think that it's safe to say we're going to do an annual recovery audit every year now. It's time saving. I'm sorry, it's already set up, so there's no setup on the Apex side. The same people that were working on our audit before will be working on it again this year. We've just started up the new cycle. And then we're hoping that, we can deploy some of this new technology I mentioned to resolve some of our issues. Definitely the findings from our first audit with Apex are giving us more leverage and bolstering our business case to implement those systems. And again, just having meetings with our supply chain team on the potential credits, we're hoping will help us as well.
Super. Well, thanks for that, Lori. Great job. Appreciate you sharing the story. For those on the webinar, you will see on the screen, we do have some additional information for those that are interested. This will display on your screen, but if you're interested in a Gartner report around navigating fraudulent supplier management solution market, if you're interested in AP recovery audit, which is what Lori and I talked about today, duplicate payment prevention, a little more of a progressive step forward. Payment fraud protection, certainly that's something that probably keeps us all up at night. Supplier onboarding and management, automating that process, or a white paper. So if you will have the option to choose this. If this is something that you're interested in, it'll be on your screen for the next 5 to 10 minutes. And feel free to check those boxes, and we'll make sure you get you additional information on that. Mark?
With that, we're going to enter the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you haven't already submitted your question for Phil and Lori, or if you've thought of another question for Phil and Lori, go ahead, use the chat tool on your screen to send them to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. First question for you, Lori, from one of our attendees. They want to know, what advice would you give for engaging your supply chain counterparts in helping you with making changes?
So I've been really lucky with our supply chain group. We have some new people over there, but they are just as interested as we are in engaging, because they want their vendors paid on time. They want their vendors paid correctly. And it actually helped during COVID because we were changing credit terms. And so we were working with them just day in and day out. So, I mean, my recommendation would be reach out, talk to them. Once we started talking almost every day during COVID, we just started tossing ideas around, and it was a great way for us to get to know one another. And now I think that we both feel like we have a great partner with each department.
We have a related question from another attendee. They're wondering, can you tell us more about the process changes you've made as a result of the findings of your recovery audit?
Well, one thing we're trying to do is more statement audits ourselves, but also, again, working with our supply chain group. So we particularly get a lot of credits through warranties. So a lot of our maintenance groups. So we've reached out to the supply chain buyer that does most of the work with the maintenance team to get a heads up on what we should be expecting as far as some of those credits go, and also working directly with the vendors to gain access and visibility to those credits.
Lori, another attendee writes, did you do a vendor master database cleanup as part of this project?
We did not, but let me tell you, we should.
I reckon that's a sentiment shared by many people on the line. So do you feel like that puts you at a disadvantage, or do you think that you would turn up even more if you had cleaned up the vendor master database? What's your spidey sense tell you about that, Lori?
Well, my spidey sense tells, so we have vendors that we set up with different locations, right? So for example, our ports, maybe we use location 1 to pay landing fees, and we use location 2 to pay taxes. And so we did find quite a lot of duplicate payments in that respect because people were using the wrong location, and our ERP doesn't catch a duplicate if it's not coded to the same vendor, same location kind of thing. So yeah, I think it would be huge, and it's definitely on our radar to clean that up. We also have a lot of duplicate vendors. So the same vendor has more than one number, which obviously also creates duplicates.
So how about it, Phil? I mean, does that make it harder to catch some of these problems when you don't have a clean vendor master database? Should you be doing a cleanup as part of a recovery audit project?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's best practice to always, and it's not just one time, right? I mean, vendor master is like a living, breathing monster. And so I would recommend that, yes, you got to get it cleaned up historically, but if you just clean it up historically and you don't have some sort of continuous cleanup, unfortunately, especially if you have change in your business, you're going to be right back with it. But to your question, does it make it harder? No, it doesn't make it harder, but it certainly generates more recoveries when you have a vendor master that isn't clean. And a lot of times that's around duplicate payments. It doesn't so much impact the statement side of the business, but absolutely a messy vendor master will result in a higher number of duplicate payments.
Lori Marie wants to know, tell us more about how it is you're processing invoices.
So we're still quite a manual shop. We process about 60% of our invoices manually. That's one of the reasons that we're really looking towards some better automation because, you know, when you have humans, you get human error, and our ERP, or probably any ERP, is not going to catch a duplicate invoice unless it's exactly the same. So I just actually ran across one yesterday that we paid duplicate because somebody entered 2 dashes. So say it was AS-1234. One of our employees entered AS dash. So yeah, we really would like to get on more EDI. We do have about 40% our catering system, our fuel system. So some of the big expenses do run through an automated system, but we're still fairly manual.
As your team works from home, are you having more challenges in processing those invoices in a timely manner?
Yeah, for sure. We have. It being in the office, I mean, I know a lot of people are looking forward to maybe permanently staying from home, but I think what we found here at Alaska is we really enjoy the collaborative environment, especially
You
when
like each other.
We do. And we find that, you know, people sitting across from each other can just shoot over a question really quick, and it's a lot easier than trying to send an email and get a response or even chat. So it has been challenging.
If you have any say in a matter, it's clear what you think should happen, but what is the business think should happen with the finance staff, and how are you trying to plan for that, Lori?
So Alaska is an in-person environment. So we are mostly back in the office right now with safety precautions in place. So I'm sitting here looking at some, you know, disinfectant wipes and hand sanitizer. We do allow
They
people.
won't help you with that filthy vendor master database. Sorry.
You are so right. But we do allow some employees to work from home a couple of days a week.
How about it, Phil? What's going to happen as folks start returning to the office? Sounds like Alaska Airlines is ahead of the game, but as we get into this hybrid environment, or even as folks just start to slowly come in, what complications is that going to create? And how does that figure into this whole recovery audit and vendor master cleanup discussion we've been having here?
Yeah, Mark, I think I've answered this question about 1,000 times over the last couple of months because it's so relevant. You know, in our business, we track everything. And so if we go back and look at kind of what happened with recoveries around that March to summer timeframe, and again, it takes a few months for those that we're kind of at that 90-day behind the transaction. It takes us a little time to see that, but we saw a spike. We saw a spike towards the end of 2020 calendar year based on that time period. And, you know, there's dozens of reasons why that would have occurred, but you know, at the root of it goes back to what I said earlier. There's this big change. People, you know, uprooting themselves from office environments and going home, which means, well, you know, I've got 3 monitors. You know, I've got a docking station. I got a desk. And so they're kind of picking that up and going home, some of which have offices, some kitchen tables. So that distraction created a spike in overpayments. And this is speculation, but what I anticipate is that there will be, on a smaller scale, a similar impact as people start coming back to work. You know, it's like, okay, or we're going to hybrid. You know, I work from home Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'm in the office, you know, Tuesday, Friday, or whatever. Just that constant change and people kind of forgetting things at home. And it's like, oh, I brought this home and then I left it when I went back to the office. And so it's just an opinion, but I anticipate, not to the same scale, but I do anticipate there being a little spike based off of this kind of hybrid change time period.
You know, I never thought of it before, Phil, but that's another reason folks ought to automate their invoice processing. Can you imagine trying to lug those monitors back and forth that we're all using to rekey all this information into our ERP? But I digress. So, Phil, we have a question from an attendee. They're wondering, are you seeing a spike in fraud attempts? And if so, what are the most common ways that fraudsters are trying to get at payments?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and this is something that is always a prominent topic at our elite events, which is preventing that fraud. We're seeing a lot around the bank account and folks having email systems compromised, fraudsters finding ways to get in, change a bank account for a very small period of time. Large amount of volume kind of goes through it, and then immediately they change it back. And so, yes, I mean, most of what we're seeing is around somehow changing the bank account. And so that's what I was talking about earlier. When you've got manual processes in place around that, you're just opening yourself up for risk versus it's technology. And I know technology is not perfect, but it eliminates 99% of the kind of potential error that would occur by manual processes.
Lori, I know you're not going to go deep into details on this subject, but what are some of the changes you've made to help stop fraudsters in the tracks in this new remote work environment you were in, and now as you shift back to the office?
It's been incredibly challenging. We had incidences where, we're receiving so much through email now because everybody's working from home. So it's really hard to call vendors and get somebody on what we strive to do is get an independent phone number, right? So we're either getting it off the invoice or we're getting it off their website. But when there's nobody in the office to answer that phone, it does make it super difficult. Sometimes if we can't verify the bank, we'll put them on check, which is definitely not ideal. But we have had a couple of instances in which people's emails were hacked. And so we just have to stick to our policy and look at other ways to try to improve the process.
Lori, one of our attendees writes in that they're a brand new AP manager. They'll be going through their first recovery audit. What advice would you give to a newbie recovery audit AP manager?
What advice would I give? Well, go in with your eyes wide open, because I would say I was shocked. I mean, look for ways. I think the biggest thing that we took away from our audit was finding what Apex was able to find for us. And then we came in the back and tried to close that door for the duplicates or the credits. So just work with your partner and keep doing it.
Well, Phil, you're no newbie at this, so let's bring this new manager up to speed. What advice would you share with this person as they go through their first recovery audit?
Yeah, I think Lori hit it right on the nail. Eyes wide open. I would strongly encourage you, if the goal of the recovery audit is to address process gaps, which it should be, if that's the goal, stay as close to the transaction as possible. Because the further you get away from that transaction, the harder it is to actually fix the issue. Because candidly, you don't know if it's still an issue because it's so old. So eyes wide open. Whoever you choose as your partner, you're hiring them to do the work. Let them do it. The onus should be 100% on them, and then stay as close to the transaction as you can. If your goal is to truly address processing gaps.
Phil, another attendee is wondering what advice you'd give to someone for evaluating potential recovery audit partners. Now, I know that there's the risk here that this could go into sales mode, so resist that temptation. But Phil, what is it? When the rubber meets the road, what are the tips and tricks for making sure you're getting the right recovery audit partner?
Yeah, well, I'm in operations, so, but, I would say if you truly want to know about a recovery audit firm, call around, ask, call references, talk to, like Lori, she decided to come with Apex based on our elite conference. So, I could spend an hour and a half telling you why I think we're the best. I've been doing this 17 years. I mean, it's just in my DNA. But don't let me tell you. Go ask others. Ask others that we partner with. or whoever you're interested in. If you're looking at another recovery audit firm, go talk to their partners, find out what their strengths, what their weaknesses, how did they help the other firms, because that's, I'm going to tell you what I want you to hear, but if you reach out to others, they're going to share, exactly what happened.
Lori, one of our attendees wants to know what IT involvement is necessary in a recovery audit.
So for us, we we gave access to the system to the Apex auditors and set them up with Alaska Air emails so that when they were reaching out to our vendors, it was coming from Alaska, not Apex. So that was the main thing, just being able to provide them with a way to VPN into our system to grab the files, so that the file transmission would be secure.
So it sounds like there's not a whole lot of burden at all.
No, it was actually, once we got them set up, it was pretty easy. The biggest challenge was really me not knowing what I needed to do to get them set up. But once we got past that, we moved right along.
Another attendee wants to know, do you have an early payment program?
So we do have some discount terms with some of our vendors. We don't do any dynamic discounting right now, and I do know that some of other companies that I've talked to did turn that off during COVID, but we are looking at a way to be able to do that in the future.
Yeah. What advice would you give to folks in terms of those terms? What has been your lessons learned? What's working? What's not?
So we have some vendors that give us discounts on only certain invoices. So yeah, there's where you run into that vendor master challenge again. So we just have to be really careful and audit control groups as people are entering in those invoices to make sure they use the right terms, because we have found, like one time we recently had one that somebody entered it as 2% 10 when it should have been 2% 15. So our system didn't recognize that we were actually paying it on time.
Hope
So
it wasn't for an engine.
It wasn't small. We were fortunate to be able to work with the company because we actually really did pay it on time, but just paying attention to and making sure you're using the right terms.
Another attendee's wondered how you're paying your suppliers. Have you moved to electronic payments? What percentage of your payments are made electronically? Is it ACH or is it card? That's like 3 questions all in one.
Most of ours are on ACH. We do have a VCA program with the cards. A few wire, not very many. We try to stay away from that because of the wire fees, but the vast majority of our payments are on ACH.
Yeah, how's the card program working out for you? Is that popular in the in your space?
It is. Yeah, it is with some. I know that some of my counterparts use it more than we do, and I would love to use it more as well. But some of our customers, especially, when you're buying an engine, they don't want to take a payment on a credit card. So
yeah, that's a nice big rebate. Phil, what advice would you give to the folks on the line who might be embarking upon a recovery audit program? What's the single biggest piece of advice you'd give to them today?
Single biggest piece of advice. I guess I'll go back to, if the goal is to address shortcomings, partner with procurement and sourcing. As we are identifying and recovering funds, I would encourage you to, and Lori talked about this, you're not in this by yourself, right? I mean, there are some things that truly are kind of the result of accounts payable, but there are some things that accounts payable can't fix necessarily, returns issue. They can put proactive measures in place. And so just, again, if your goal is to address shortcomings, which it should be, as you are learning what these findings are, and I'll make the assumption that you're close to the transaction, partner with procurement, because what we've seen is when we deliver results and there's a collaborative effort, AP, procurement, master data, results occur. So I
Yeah.
would say that's it. It's just, you're not in this by yourself when it comes to addressing the issue.
I got to ask a follow-up question, and you've mentioned shortcomings a couple of times. What's the most common shortcoming in processes that you see, Phil, over the 17 years you've been doing this?
I would say from a overpayment, so we'll say from a duplicate payment standpoint, the root of it is something to do with their vendor master, right? So that's because 17 years ago it was really more around invoice coding, because there was more manual invoice coding 17 years ago than there is today. Companies are either embarking on some sort of electronic invoicing or are already there, or at least some percentage. And so that it still exists, but it's not as prominent as it was 17 years ago. So I'd say more around kind of master data and the messiness of that, creating duplicate payments. And then from a credit standpoint, somewhat depends on the industry, but we'll assume that you're everyone's kind of buying something regardless of what they're doing. Returns are always a big thing. Canceled invoices. And so, invoice gets canceled, yet whatever the service or goods get canceled, invoice still gets paid. So those are a couple areas. And again, that needs a partnership with procurement. And sometimes it's just a training issue to get that addressed.
Okay, so one more. Did we see us uptick in canceled invoices during COVID?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
How big?
Yeah. Big. I'll just say big, right? I mean, and again, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's data, right? I mean, that's what we believe in leveraging, and the data shows us that, that kind of not so much March, because March was really more like a transition, but it was kind of April and May, and again, we're still learning. We're still learning because some clients were not as close to the transaction, unfortunately, and so we're still learning what happened in that. That's right. But absolutely lots of services, marketing events that were scheduled, canceled, and they'd already been paid, prepaid, credit sitting on the books. So yes, Mark, that is, they're there.
When we get on the other side of this thing, y'all are coming back and you're going to share the tale of the tape on all the craziness that happened over the past 18 months. Lori, same question I originally asked Phil. To you, what's the single biggest piece of advice you'd give to your peers listening in here who might be gearing up to do a recovery audit?
Just do it. I mean, don't put it off. Don't put it off like we did.
Lori, Phil, thank you so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing your insights with us today. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join us. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Kelsey. Ms. Kelsey.
Thank you. And I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially close out today. If you could please fill out the short evaluation form that will appear once you close out of the webinar. This will help us better serve your needs in future webinars. As a reminder, the on-demand materials will be emailed to everyone within 2 business days, and this will include a PDF of the slides as well as the link to the recording of today's presentation. And thank you again to Lori, Phil, and Mark for a great presentation today. And thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. This webinar was brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by apexanalytix. Thank you all and have a great day.